drop the drug!
It's okay, I got that
The madness behind the monster.
hard shit!
HULK vs Godzilla is many things. The way I see it, it's kinda like the weird cousin of Simon vs Kyle, with similar themes of humanity triumphing over cosmic forces, except it's on the side of comics this time. You also got potentially one of the best Devil Artemis animation in that battle history, the most visually compelling HULK episode bar none, but how does it compare in general to either monster's previous episodes? Did they downplay Ultima? Does this battle thematically work in the schemes of both characters? And are my thoughts gonna be controversial compared to what the community thinks as a whole of this episode? I'm Marco Krypton, subscribe for more of that battle stuff, and watch until the very end for all these questions to be answered. Without further ado, let's get it! Similar to the previous Marvel episode, I really like whenever they showcase the quote-unquote evolution of the character across various mediums and stories, this time starting with a very comic HULK debuted in, followed by all the live-action Jolly Greens in order. Good stuff. On the topic of multiple HULKs, I also appreciate how quickly they delve into the various personalities, even if going from Joe Fixit to Devil HULK is a bit weird, but the priority is still given to the character stuff before the power scaling stuff, so I am happy. I was wondering which HULK persona was gonna be the quote-unquote main dish for this episode, after being world broken by Doomsday and proven to be not so immortal by Broly. Well, to my joyful surprise, not only did we get a full and more complete look at the immortal Green Door shenanigans, but the quote-unquote HULK this episode was gonna be about was none other than Bruce Banner himself. For the first time gets more spotlight shed on him past the explosion checkpoint, being treated as an actual character as his intelligence is treated as a notable power scaling attribute. Obviously this entire episode would fall apart if they didn't do this, given the Banner HULK team up this fight and matchup will play into, but still, they had a goal and they delivered in my view. The editing flows as nicely as it is eye-catching, we get a new tourist speed feat as per tradition, and I like the incredible HULK footage juxtaposed when talking about how eldritch and reality-breaking Gamma is in the 616 universe, given how edgy looking the Gamma mutates were in that movie. I mean, come on, even younger me thought that the Abomination looked more like a zombie than a fishman. Retconning She-Hulk's fourth wall breakiness to further solidify the idea of Gamma mutates being indeed strong enough to burst panels was pretty clever. To once again enter the quote, I have no idea if this was done on purpose or not, but brilliant nonetheless side of things, there's some silent humor about all of HULK's less obvious powers being listed before the most straightforward one, aka Super Strength, almost as much as Godzilla's standard power set preceding the very casually thrown in reality warping and all the complex stuff that comes with Ultima. Like, these are the exact opposite manners of listing powers, yet they carry the same energy to it. I don't know, it's just funny. On the less comical side of things, throughout these breakdowns, HULK and Godzilla are also paralleled in thematically relevant ways, and you know how much I love that shit, stay tuned till later in the video. And they're both described as created by the darkness of mankind's psyche, lots of emphasis about their immortality, and they're both called quote-unquote Sons of the Bomb, which, on further examination, might be the rawest potential track name for this matchup. Even more than Meltdown. Tune in later for my thoughts on the one they ultimately went with. But unfortunately, the more we move on from the HULK stuff, and the further we get the Godzilla analysis, I'm sorry to say, I think the latter is a weaker side of these breakdowns. And not for the same reasons you might have already heard. Let's see, I love the distant boom sound effects during the spooky Godzilla introduction. It's very neat writing to compare Godzilla's towering height to a mushroom cloud. Remember me mentioning how weird it is to shift from Fixit to Immortal HULK? Godzilla's breakdown kinda does something like that twice. Like, there's this weird interruption of Shin's breakdown to bring up Hanna-Barbera's pew pew lasers, talk about tonal whiplash. Charles Barkley somehow getting more screen time while Godzilla in Hell gets nonchalantly scaled to planet level as we casually fly past Godzilla defeating God without the Zilla, and Snow Godzilla's dimension tearing beam being very awkwardly shoved into a much more grounded part of the rundown. I'm not here to tell you that Composite Godzilla, aka Compzilla, is easy to go over, but still, I'm sorry to say I don't think they did the best job balancing it all out, even with the sheer size of what they they had to go over taken into consideration. It feels as if the bite-sized stuff gets enlarged and the large stuff becomes bite-sized. It's a bit of a shame, really. That still doesn't mean there isn't anything to like, however. I dig the balance of nods to both older and newer Gojis, how they use 1954 and -1 footage to talk about Godzilla representing Japan's devastation and resilience respectively, or the old tangent about Godzilla and Japan honestly, which ends on a relatively clever way to make fun of Godzilla for the 98th time. And the way they introduce Ultima was pretty neat, as they highlight archetype being what allows an otherwise physically impossible being to exist in a kaiju-less world. Pretty unique. And the way they differentiate the two main flavors of Godzilla before delving into the singular point side of things was nice too. But accurate as it may be, I just realized that demonic Oni is kinda like saying chai tea. And I was expecting a wee bit more delving into the reality warpiness side of Godzilla Ultima, although I was probably spoiled by GoTzill's amazing research, and you could make the argument that deciding whether something happened or not is kinda everything a character would need to keep up with the comic book herald, which was the case here, to be fair. Still, I wouldn't mind a super long list again. But even everything outside of that is pretty evident which radioactive rumbler was gonna get, let's say, more generously interpreted standard form. While Hulk shatters dimensions and the cosmos themselves before the defeat section even comes in, all Godzilla gets is meteors and planets. Like, yeah, obviously I always agreed about standard Hulk being stronger overall, but planet level Goji? Really? Another giveaway detail I noticed is something relatively recent as far as Dead Battle breakdowns go. It's what I decided to call the "he's so cool" effect. When Weeds and Boomsticks talk about a character as if they're trying to sell it, instead of actually listing their feat, it's kind of a dead giveaway that they're gonna lose. I'm referring to stuff like, oh, Bardock is so cool, he can punch and kick you. Azura is so goddamn cool, you guys. As if they're trying to apologize in advance for who they're gonna give the L to, And ending on Godzilla being immortal being what makes him king is sorta nice and raw sounding, but I think it could have used a few more rewrites. I think that's more in line with how they describe Unicron, if anything. And funnily enough, both were solidly described as the exact type of foe the Marvel opponent defeated already. Either Galactus already killing an embodiment of evil, or Bruce solving countless, quote, tests on humanity already. That part I really liked. Fun fact, the spooky quotes at the beginning of each breakdown are actually a reference to how each issue of the Immortal Hulk run started. And speaking of origins, I really wish they delved into Hulk Godzilla being inspired by Dr. Jekyll and /Mr. Hyde and King Kong / the Beast from 2000 Phantoms respectively. Funny enough, come on, the opportunity for a joke was right there. What, did they run out of trivia power after using it all on Tom vs. Wily? It would have been nice, that's all I'm saying. As we're introduced to what's possibly the bluest night in history, no complaints here, it makes all the bright red and greens pop up like crazy and I love it, a reporter flies over rampaging Godzilla. I mean, we are talking about a -1x singular point mashup, both overly antagonistic Gojis, so I'm actually glad they didn't use most of his Godzilla model this time around, as that's a strictly heroic Godzilla, most of the time. The very precise way Godzilla tail sweeps Hulk right into his face was probably thanks to Shin's radar sense though. Throughout this fight there's a lot of emphasis about Hulk's incredible speed, but I'm also glad his surprisingly nimble agility was also given the spotlight here, because look at this, the parkour, the fluidity, the sheer scale of Gorge as he is framed as if it was a mountain to climb, just beautiful. I love this bit of Hulk initially struggling toward Godzilla, only to easily push him away once he applies both ends, establishing David's strength advantage against this Goliath, a point that, let's say, gets further solidified shortly after. I really appreciate how grounded this battle is at the start, like it's just cars and buildings being destroyed. An average Tuesday for both of these monsters. It's not like in Simon vs. Kyle where multiversal is the word of the day, And this moment of Hulk eating cars at Goji while the latter is just seriously unimpressed for a few seconds is some of the funniest shit that Battle's done recently, I swear. Sad we didn't get any Clash in Hell stuff. I feel like they could have fit right in between the grounded first half and the ultimate Groundhog Day loop, making for 3 consecutive arcs, I said this was gnarly before, and I further emphasize it here because just holy amazing sound design, Batman. Godzilla being on the receiving end of a move King Kong usually says for big lizards is just all kinds of deliciously ironic. As Bruce Banner suggests his green friends to switch places from a very spaceship Hulk looking mindscape, nice, only for the latter to refuse, in a fun twist of the opposite happening in Infinity War. The camera slowly pans up to the -1 charging beam as the king slowly regenerates, and just the music, the glowing eyes, the slow turn, the camera movement, the floating debris. Is it ironic that I think one of the best displays of pure rage in Death Battle history comes from a Hulk episode but not Hulk himself? Like, oh, Green Scar is raging, don't get me wrong, but Goji here was coldly pissed. Big difference. And it's really subtle, but you can see the transformation from standard Savage Hulk to the Warlord Green Scar. Both in a different use of pronouns, more like the Incredible Hulk, am I right, ladies and gentlemen? And the utter size difference, like look at this. Hulk goes from being literally neck sized to taking up Godzilla's entire face. But if Hulk conveys character in aesthetics and dialogue, his opponent does so in mannerisms. I love how done Godzilla looks here, with his seemingly unkillable opponent that keeps on forcing him to regenerate, and the way he blindly swipes the air when Hulk is in his face really conveys how much of an animal Goji can be at his core, only for that to be immediately subverted by the cleverness of getting back up with a nuclear pulse, with amazing camera work to boot, mind you. What I mistook for a Godzilla Earth lightning blast was actually a full-on nuclear pulse like with Monsterverse Goji. The only Monsterverse nod in this entire fight, shockingly enough. Hulk thunderclapping back to Earth like a freaking gamma meteor is not only really creative, but it also reminded me of those Hulk vs Saitama animations. And just the music just hits here, man. I was ready / hoping for another instance of Brandon walking his soul out, but the cinematic skill in this moment just kinda would have been lost if all we got here was rock blasting in the background, you know? Speaking of nods, Godzilla tries to end the fight with a spiral beam aimed towards the heavens, only to be grimly reminded that this is not season 2 anymore. Somewhat of a wasted opportunity for the explosion blast to not resemble a mushroom cloud, but still, amazing clash regardless. I love the scale and quietness in this moment as Hulk looks at a Shin-like Godzilla corpse, and the way he walks away is just hilarious. Plus a more straightforward MCU reference. Before we officially enter the main event of this fight, a few more thoughts about this first half. While Hulk winning at the start and transforming first would both foreshadow his loss, given the formula followed by most episodes, and while I'm glad they subverted both of those notions in this one, they did follow the trend of the person that pulls the top card first being the one to lose. The writing simply being very good at hiding Bruce's intelligence was gonna be Hulk's win con, not this trend. We didn't even get a Bruce Banner voice actor in the description when this episode premiered, so him popping up at the fight alone was a very pleasant surprise. The animator Devil Artemis confirmed that this specific shot of Green Scar aka Worldbreaker was inspired by the MCU Void aka Sentry, another split personality having Marvel hero, and another character inspired by the Hiroshima bombings. What in the odds? The energy effects include a mixture of both 3D and 2D animation, a mashup I'm always very fond of. Bruce immediately figuring out the archetype as an higher dimensional particle, like he did with the Gamma from just one glance while he's not on the driver's seat, mind you, was a great display of intelligence. To start with, the fucked up looking creature begins to emanate red smoke, but no my friends, this is not puppy playtime, because Hulk and Godzilla proceed to recreate the cover for the official 2025 crossover, then we get the very first time skip in Death Battle history, and it's very unlikely to be the last. This may sound a bit odd, but I actually love this small moment, for many reasons. The kaiju pulling a FNAF jumpscare out of the blue gave me major Cloverfield vibes, and that's one of my favorite movies of all time, mind you, so I was never gonna be unbiased about this. Secondly, it further solidifies that this Godzilla is an hostile antagonistic force that Hulk and Banner are trying to stop, to save the planet. Not saying this wouldn't be conveyed without any casualties, But let's just say there's a reason why empty climaxes in superhero movies kinda fall flat. There's no stakes. Really wish people realized that sooner instead of whining about Man of Steel for 12 years and getting us to this point, but I digress. Lastly, the pure scream of terror from the reporter as she dies really caught me off guard first time around. I don't know, it felt very genuine, and many started suggesting this is a canon, so hey, she's probably just gonna regenerate again, no biggie. We all agree to call this gauntlet the Ultima Nullifier, right? Don't get me wrong, I did see various cool name suggestions from the orthogonal gauntlet, singularity manipulation, atom snapping end, aka smash, and so forth, but this just clears, I'm sorry. For a fight with so many zoomed away shots, the one time there's a zoomed in expression on a smaller character, they absolutely nailed it. Like, at the time I'm writing this, I barely just got into 3D modeling in my new school, but I'm still stumped at how good this expression looks. Like, for all I know, the Rivals model simply does have enough facial wigs to make an expression worth of a DreamWorks movie, but maximum praise to Devil Artemis regardless. Also, obviously, Smash reference to the first Avengers and Hulk with a gauntlet potential being an endgame nod too. Yeah, there's a lot of MCU isms doing it after this fight, but somehow it's a lot less insufferable than usual for some reason. It's even hype at some points, weirdly enough. Maybe it's my MCU hating ass coming down over the years, I don't know. Speaking of time, thanks for the gauntlet, we are told by the reporter that this battle lasted for days, with Bruce himself mentioning over 1 trillion attempts, which is a much higher number than there are seconds even in a week, so given Ultima's power set, I would not be shocked in the slightest if what we saw was actually a time loop situation that seems like it lasted days, even from just the point of view of onlookers. Does this technically count as an MCUism, even if it's not about Bruce specifically? Yeah, what the hell. This basically is a Dormammu I come to Bargain moment. Also, of all the dead battles that try to go for storytelling over action, Bruce having the mental fortitude to keep this plan going for the one below all knows how long is one of the best character moments in the whole series. I would say Bruce solving Ultima is the holy shit crossover moment for this fight, but it's more so Bruce treading the same ground other scientists before him already did in the Godzilla franchise, with the extra help of infinite time, mind you. Love the visuals of Hulk running so fast that this car Bruce created the gauntlet in gets flipped elsewhere. This entire sequence especially feels as if Devil Artemis took everything that worked about the rocket moment in Chief's lair and applied it here. Not to mention the scale of it all, Ultima pulling a shield with his tail, Hulk basically fighting the big boss of a video game, the sheer agility and environmental interaction, the orchestral music ramping up, the formulas Hulk turns into being Easter eggs for various OP fictional characters, Hulk punching straight into the entity's true form and dimension exactly like he's been doing to the Green Door. Like, I hope I'm not sounding like a puppy getting excited over jiggly keys, but this combination of elements just clicked really well for me. With some other things however, let's say I can also see where certain criticisms are coming from. Let's start with the idea that Godzilla Ultima did nothing. On one end, he immediately killed Hulk as soon as he showed up, kept killing him for 3 days straight if not 1 trillion times more, and with Groundhog Days possibly involved. The only other character who killed an immortal opponent this many times was Darkseid. Was freaking Darkseid, when he put Thanos in Infinite Omega Sanction, making this the canonically longest fight in that battle history, quantifiably speaking. And no, Segata noise is still going. He poses another challenge for Standard Hulk that the power category is a straight up tie. That's a pretty notable amount of respect for a scarcely known character outside of hardcore fans. On the other end however, the framing is a bit unfortunate. Godzilla and Hulk both get roughly equal levels of stuff to do, but there's more focus and time given on Godzilla recovering compared to Hulk recovering relatively damn quickly before resuming the pummeling, and even when the Hulk is the one that dies over and over, it's portrayed less as a victory for Godzilla, but more so an heroic uphill battle for Hulk as it gets closer and closer to a W. Unfortunately, they do cut away from the one scene where Godzilla is on the offensive and winning, so the pacing results in what's basically Hulk winning? Seeing cuts? Hulk winning. And I also think it's ironic that both me, Cap Sirius and the entire Death Battle subreddit thought that Bruce was the one with no way of reaching Ultima, only for Death Battle to take the Marvel cosmology and say that Ultima would be the one unable to reach the below place. It's just funny. In case you wanted an even more simplified version, basically the entity exists outside of Infinity, but the below place it's a place outside a place, outside a place, outside a place, that's outside Infinity. Look at them screaming at each other like angry neighbors. I love this little editor. From Ultima's perspective, it's like a video game character who kept respawning, literally punching him to the screen. And he couldn't get rid of the character because the spawn point was outside the computer. Banner basically banned them from server 616. Now, they did confirm that the ending was left intentionally vague on whether Ultima was killed or simply sealed away due to the ambiguous nature of Godzilla Ultima. Ditto goes for the official length of this fight, which could be anywhere between days to trillions of years, and not just in one timeline, mind you. Unfortunately, various things had to be cut from the fight proper, like the one scene of everyone wanted of Hulk, so long Gay Bowser, Godzilla somewhere else, Joe Fixit making an appearance, and the Atomic Breath vs Gamma Ray Beams, unfortunately. But I am glad that the one below all wasn't involved in this fight animation. It wouldn't have been outside help, it offered no thematic relevance, nor would it figure out Ultima like Bruce did. A scientist who, mind you, created an interstellar radio on a barren planet, without a box of scraps. I have no reason to doubt the things he could accomplish in a whole-ass city with infinite time on his hands. So pretty clever and uniquely source accurate win conditions from the Death Battle team. Bruce replicating the orthogonal diagonalizer basically makes it so that the archetype that allows Ultima to exist turns into crystals, forbidding the entity from ever returning to this universe again. But like in the source material, it didn't kill it per se, otherwise there wouldn't be any crystals, as there would be no singular point to generate the archetype that later was crystallized. Speaking of, I really dig how veiny, glowy green they are here, instead of just pale blue eyes. Really conveys that Hulk's power is also something deeply interdimensional and just as eldritch as Ultima, if not more. Probably more. The final MCU-ism in this episode comes from the post-analysis, in which Boomstick says that he was made for this line in Endgame, which again somehow feels more hype and fitting here than the movie itself. For whatever reason, much like the everything you build from Apocalypse. On the topic of Marvel Comics, it's pretty funny that this episode was the one to end the trend of non-comic book characters winning in spite of inferior cosmology saga, and it's thanks to the comic book character winning in part due to the superior cosmology. And just like that we're back home. To say the Godzilla fans were upset about this outcome would be an understatement, but I also think many failed to take into consideration that Death Battle pretty much never uses crossover scaling unless it's very specific examples. Link did not get Smash Bros scaling, Batman wasn't scaled to the Ninja Turtles, and so on. But to still talk about thinking outside the box, after Jerica's Dio being such an awful father that led to his son losing, and a fine-ass Nia being such an amazing wife that led to her husband winning, here we have Gwenpool being such a goofball that solidified Hulk's victory. Hopefully that will help her when she faces off against Superboy Prime. Overall, I really dug how close the fight was, instead of either Hulk solos because comics or Godzilla solos because Ultima. I don't think either of those would have been as satisfying. Madness of the Monster is a track that sorta took me off guard in multiple ways. Firstly, the title. RIP to Meltdown, that was always my favorite potential track title for this matchup. It conveys the savagery and nuclear-ness of both characters in a very straightforward way, but this works too. Especially since I'm pretty sure that simple is the least fitting word you could use to describe Death Battle's take on this matchup. So they went with something I love just as much as simple effectiveness. Double meanings. The madness part obviously conveys the rage synonymous with Hulk. The of the monster part references obviously the King of the Monsters title, but when you put both together and frame it in the context of the fight, it can also refer to the sheer craziness behind Ultima's, well, everything, which even Bruce needed seemingly a trillion attempts to solve. The second way this track surprised me is in the music itself, which rather than an heavy metal rock solo, fitting into the kick-assness of this fight, instead we get a dramatic cinematic score fitting with the moviness of this fight, so to say, which I find to be just as much of a valid approach. Obviously, even newcomers in the Godzilla fandom will recognize the ta-ta-tan motif, but I've also seen people highlight possible inspirations from the 2003 Hulk theme, and I'll have to listen to it a couple of times to confirm or deny it. I mean, the track art low-key references the movie cover already, and it's definitely the more character-focused Hulk theme we've ever gotten, much like this episode is the most character-focused Hulk episode, so hey, it all tracks. Okay. Yeah, speaking of, it's funny that the track art seemingly gives the idea of Godzilla Ultima chasing Hulk into the below place by grabbing hold of the green door, an idea that I brought up in this edit in my prediction video with Cap Series. Too bad I severely underestimated Marvel cosmology. I like how it conveys both the physical monster side of things, with their hands and claws on the forefront, and the metaphysical parts of themselves, aka the green door and the entity's archetype fog, the latter of which being in the background, which all combines together to visually say something along the lines of, yeah, this might seem like a simple brawl on the surface, but look deeper into the forces behind these monsters, and this shit gets extra dimensional, dude. Very nice. The narrative theme for this fight is a very straightforward unstoppable force versus a movable object, as I said in my reaction video, but for today's narrative themes section I wanna explore something else. Much like the Omni-Man and Ghost Rider duologies did beforehand, HULKzilla works as a great thematic successor to both previous Hulk episodes and Godzilla vs. Gunner. Firstly, there's the aforementioned upward spiral way Godzilla attempts on his opponent once again, with much different results this time around, but still. It's beautifully thematic for the Godzilla side of things, since Godzilla does usually triumph when put against other monsters, but whenever he's the main big monster to worry about, say 1954, Shin, -1, Singular Point, humanity always successfully defeats him with the power of science, bitch. Yes, science! So when you take that into consideration, aka Godzilla winning against other monsters but losing against humanity, the two Godzilla Death Battle episodes perfectly fall into the both sides of the Godzilla spectrum. I'm not saying Godzilla is a forbidden from ever returning on the show, I just can't think of a thematically cohesive role to give him that he didn't have already. Secondly, each Hulk Death Battle basically works as a time capsule for how Hulk was perceived at the time. Against Doomsday, he was mostly seen as a bannerless, angry green man with destructive savior tendencies. Against Broly, he began to develop a more specific personality, still outside of Banner, but it's almost villainous here, on top of the devilish immortality shenanigans, like the early Immortal Hulk run. But against Godzilla, both Hulk and Banner are portrayed as three-dimensional characters that come to terms with one another, on top of a more complete look at the Immortal Hulk Green Door stuff, which receives so much depth since then that it is basically an instant respawn button now, and World Breaker gets activated only for a brief moment, as Bruce and Hulk realize that pure destruction alone is not the way to save the planet this time, which results in a pretty much them saving the entire universe together. That's awesome. And finally, the way these battles end. After Hulk's day ended with a spiky impalement, decapitation, and lack of proper endurance, then Hulk Broly ended by resisting decapitation, being disintegrated as your opponent falls to the ground in exhaustion. HULKzilla ends with Hulk delivering the spiky impalement, decapitation, resisting disintegration, showcasing proper endurance, and falling to the ground in exhaustion after a victory, basically bookending both of his previous episodes, in a very beautiful way, honestly. When all combined, this basically makes for a subtle character arc source for Death Battle Hulk, in a way that's wrapped up so perfectly that I am now actively hoping Hulk doesn't return to the show for a fourth time. Trilogies are just so satisfying, you know? For today's second bonus chapter, you missed those, didn't ya? I wanna go over something this episode does that makes my narrative thematics loving ass positively explode with joy every time they do it. This fight is basically another one of those me versus the darker self I could have been, like Widowkiss, Diocard and Shigaito before it. By using the already not exactly short of list of connections between the two nuclear monsters, Godzilla in this episode essentially ends up being the embodiment of everything Hulk would be without Bruce Banner, an immortal, radioactive mutate, channeling and empowered by nuclear energy, who's also a force of pure destruction, and an embodiment of humanity's apathetic and destructive tendencies. Both Godzilla and Worldbreaker Hulk use their energy pulses to move around into the fight almost one after the other, as if the parallel was meant to be intentional. But it's when Godzilla Ultima comes into play that the dark parallels grow as big as the entity itself. By being the direct avatar of a multiversal entity that seeks to destroy everything and everyone on a multiversal scale, Ultima is basically what Hulk would have been if the One Below All succeeded in molding the Green Giant as his personal harbinger of destruction. But much like the nuclear tragedies that inspired both characters, destruction for destruction's sake only leads to, well, destruction. The introduction of nukes into warfare exposed the cruel reality of war. It's no longer a matter of who is wrong or right, but who is left. All of this can be prevented by people deciding to prioritize humanity over devastation. If Ultima decided to call it a day and stop persisting on another universe instead of the one with Hulk in it, it would have survived. But instead it kept on persisting a meaningless path of destruction which only led to Bruce Banner, aka the one thing that separates the Hulk from ever being just as bad as Godzilla, gathering up enough archetype samples to solve the Ultima formula and destroy it for good. Its thirst for destruction ended up destroying itself. In some sweet irony, Ultima ends up paralleling the One Below All not just as a shadow archetype for the worst of what Hulk might have been if he didn't say nah to the One Below All, but its nature as an interdimensional entity that operates on a seemingly incomprehensible substance is something Bruce already figured out by studying Gamma. Hulk vs Godzilla pairs two destructive forces against one another, but they're so similar there would have been an eternal cycle of death and destruction, with Bruce being the only tiebreaker, which also works on a beautifully thematic level as Godzilla has been defeated by brilliant scientists since his very beginning. Banner defeating Godzilla is basically him defeating the embodiment of mankind's fuck-ups. Much like him and Hulk winning by working together, is him accepting all negative sides of him, his trauma, abuse, and a fucked up mental health. Godzilla existed as a test for humanity, and Bruce Banner passed it with flying colors, most predominantly green.
We did it.
Yeah, not gonna lie, there are things to criticize for this episode, don't get me wrong, but at the same time there are so many things I think they did right, if not downright beautifully, that I think I'm gonna have to go for a 9.5 out of 10. The Godzilla breakdown and the fight not fully capturing the cool things potential Kate but this matchup kinda dragged down what would have otherwise been a clean 10 for me. Still not an 11 though, that's saved for the special occasions. But what do you think? Comment down below if you agree with this ranking or not. Drink lots of water, I'll do the same. Orko Krypton, hoping I made your day slightly better.